So I'd like to welcome everyone today for our session on coding with Agentic AI tools. My name's Rich McCue. I manage the Digital Scholarship Commons in the library and have a background in systems administration and a master's in education focusing on educational technology. And our guest today is my one of my sons, Ryan McCue, who's a software engineer. And last time we met, about a month or so ago, he showed me what he was doing with the Agentic AI tools, and I thought I was very impressed, and it was interesting to see how he was using it. So I thought I'd uh, ask him to come and talk to us. And just so people know, probably about half of the hour together, we're going to be Ryan presenting and showing the workflow, and then the last half hour, 20 minutes, question and answer with, because we do have a lot of expertise in the room, Zoom room, will have people chime in with questions and answers about agentic AI and maybe where it's appropriate and maybe where it's not appropriate to use. Um, so my son Ryan, he's a software engineer with nine years of experience, has been working remotely uh, since 2019, so pre-COVID. Um, and manages a team of 4 or 5 other software engineers distributed around North and South America. Um, so with that, I'll turn the time over to Ryan.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, as my dad said, I'm Ryan. I'm an engineering manager, and I'm passionate about AI augmented development. Today, I'll show you how to use Claude Code and the principles that work with really any AI coding assistant to speed up real-world workflows. And like Rich said, I will have a nice live demo halfway through. There we go. Yeah, I have 9 years of experience building web and backend systems. I work at Clever Real Estate. It's a real estate startup based in St. Louis that helps connect home buyers and sellers with um, with agents at a reduced rate. And I've been a pretty early adopter of AI coding tools, initially just for fun, but then as they got more and more useful, I introduced them more into my actual day-to-day workflow. And today's goal is to share a realistic workflow and some of the lessons I've learned as I've been exploring these tools. Goodness. Okay, there we go. So agentic AI is a double-edged sword. It has lots of power. When done correctly, you can do really cool things with it. But on the other side, if you don't understand how it's working or that what it has access to, it can cause some real issues in your environments. A lot of these tools are used as vibe coding. So there's a recent example of a guy named Jason Lemnick who was using Replit, which is similar to Claude Code. It's a agentic AI tool. And he had a code freeze, so no code was going to be pushed up to his production environment. But the AI agent had access to his production database. So AI agent thought that there may have been something wrong in the database, so decided to wipe it. And because it was production, he lost over 1,000 customer records with it. And this right here is some of the thought process that went on in the agent. I understand it's not okay to make database changes without permission, as directed in the Replit MD file, but it did it anyways because it thought it was the right thing to do, even if it was told it shouldn't, which just really highlights how you want to make sure you're giving these tools only the access they need and not to trust them. They're like a coworker who can be crazy sometimes. They're very opinionated and think they know what's right when it's not always the case. But on the other side of things, it can give massive productivity gains when done correctly. On my team at Clever, we've been using Claude Code along with other various tools for a while now. And on average, we're about 50% more efficient compared to when we were manually coding everything by hand. That's not to say that every task is 50% more efficient. Some of them are like 200% because it can just do the full thing in 10 minutes where it take us a few hours. But in other cases, it is actually still slower, but you don't always know upfront. But on average, we're about 50% more productive. And this productivity is partially because I run a pretty experienced engineering team. Most people have over like 8 years of experience, but you can see similar productivity gains with more novice programmers. It is a little bit more dangerous, like in that example before, if they don't understand database access and giving production access to these tools, they can do pretty scary things. But if they take the time to understand the tool, understand the code that these tools are generating and the process behind it, it can make senior engineers or students actually a lot more productive too. So taking a step back, the evolution of these AI coding tools started off back back in the day when we all just wrote code manually by hand. You would use an IDE, which could maybe generate some common patterns for you, but in general, most of what you were writing is done with your keyboard and mouse. Then, pretty exciting thing happened in 2021. GitHub Copilot got released, which had LLMs giving you inline suggestions as you're typing. So if you're typing a function name like get user, it can know the code around you and try and guess what your code should be doing. Or if you're writing a list of like American states, after you've done a few of them, it'll understand what you're trying to do and fill the rest out for you. So not crazy productivity gains, but a very good quality of life improvement. A lot of the boring parts of software engineering can be done with this tab completion. Um, it didn't make productivity that much better, but it made coding a little bit easier. Then 2 years later, LLM editing tools, at least to my knowledge, became a pretty big thing. And Aider was the main tool that I've seen and worked with back then. And it does much more than GitHub Copilot. It can edit multiple files at the same time, and uh, and it knows the context of your project. The issue is though, it's just one prompt and one response where it edits your files. There's no back and forth collaboration. You have to be very clear about the context you're giving it. If you forget to tell it about a file, it just won't look for it. And it can't check to see if its code is right. It just gives you code. It's probably right, but it can't check. So it was quite powerful for the time, and you could have thousands of lines generated with these tools, but it was limited by the human interaction. Now, more recently, we've had more agentic coding tools as the models have gotten better. And my favorite currently is Claude Code, which I'll be talking about today. And the big level up for these tools are they can autonomously go and do things. They can look through your code base. They can run commands on the computer. They can access external systems like Gmail or Google Docs or grab context that way. So you can have it do more work without having to talk to you, which is really powerful and allows you to do lots of really interesting things with it. Oh, and I went over a good chunk of this already, but Claude Code is a CLI-based AI pair programmer by Anthropic, who are the owners of the Claude models, if you've heard of them. Um, it allows you to read and edit multiple files with your approval, which is a big thing that it sounds like Replit maybe doesn't do. You're able to tell it to always, you can always give the tool the option to like write if you trust it, but by default, it'll ask you every command. It allows you to run shell commands, so it can have agentic autonomy. If you have a test suite for your application, it can run that to verify its changes worked. and it can interact with external systems via MCP. And MCP is just a way to allow these models to call functions, like coding functions. So it tells it how to interact with these functions. So for example, you can grab information from Jira or Google Docs or Notion or any of these tools, which is quite useful. And it has a large context window. So with Claude Code, it can go and iterate through a task for over 30 minutes before it has to start dealing with hitting context limits. So most tasks, you don't even need to worry about that. How can Claude Code be used? There's quite a few use cases. You can really do anything with it. But the number one thing it's used for is writing and refactoring code. That's why companies pay big money for this. You can generate huge amounts of fairly high quality code with not too much effort on your end when using this tool correctly. And it's the main thing that most people use it for. Another very useful thing it does is generate documentation and comments. So at my team at Clever, we like to write software, but writing documentation is not terrible, but pretty awful to write. Once you've shipped your feature, you don't want to go back and have to write documentation for your team to remember. So with Claude Code, it can look at the code change you've done and generate a piece of documentation for you to add to your internal systems, which for me is a lifesaver and can save hours potentially after a feature is launched. Of course, you still want to edit it and make it your own, but it can get a very good first draft of it. It can brainstorm designs and roadmaps. I like to spend more of my time in the back end of systems dealing with cool integrations and stuff. I can't be as bothered to make pretty designs. So I work pretty closely with Claude Code to brainstorm designs and actually build them out. And I've found that a huge win for me. It can also break down large features you want to build into a nice roadmap and chunk it out for you. And then finally, it can debug, test, and transform text or code. So one non-coding use case I use is it can help me write a blog post. So I will use speech to text to kind of outline exactly what I want it to be like. And then I can give it a list of my previous blog posts to write my thoughts into that style easily. And that's just the first draft, but it can save me a huge amount of time and does probably 90% of the work in these cases. So really, anytime you're working with any kind of text, Claude Code can be used. Okay, well, let's try a live demo now. So I've built a small coin flipping app, and we're going to be adding a nice small feature with Claude Code. I'll be following the best practices that I've been using for the past bit. After that, we'll generate some documentation for this new feature. And then finally, we'll do a bit of brainstorming for future improvements once the app takes off. Oop, goodness. Can you guys see the screen all right? Cool.
Yeah, we can see it.
Right on. So actually, so this is the app I created. I got Claude Code to write this for me a few days ago. It's a coin flipping guessing game. You basically keep guessing and it keeps track of your win rate to see how good or lucky you are. Oh, it's a pretty good start. But what I want to do is add a leaderboard. So when I get 67%, it can be on a leaderboard. So when other people try and play the game, they can also see how well I did. So how I access Claude, or I guess this application is just a basic HTML website. There's an HTML page, a JavaScript file, and a CSS file. That's all this is. It's pretty straightforward. So to run Claude Code, I use a weird Linux distribution, so I can't run it normally. Normally, you just do you type Claude in and it works, but because I use weird Linux, it doesn't quite work that well. But this is the interface. It welcomes you, tells you what directory you're in, and some useful tips. They have a new agents feature that came out, which I haven't tried yet, but seems really cool. Um, but when I'm trying to build out a application or a feature in Claude Code, how I always start is I just let it look through the project and understand it. So I'll do read all the files in the project and then think hard and understand how it works. And then we'll see what Claude Code does. It's thinking. I can see it's listing all the files in the code base. It checks to make sure it's not malicious. That's good. And then it'll read all my files to try and understand what this application does. And this is a really good practice because before you ask it to make a change, it actually knows more about your application. So it can more effectively make the changes that you need.
Is that something you could cache, or do you have to do that every time, every morning, or every time you're starting to work on a project?
It depends. I generally do it every single time I start up a new instance. Um, so it does, if you're paying per usage, it is a bit, but it'll generally save time in the like as you go through. So the project overview, it's a coin flip guessing game with a beautiful interface, kind of walks through the flow, the tech stack, the architecture. So it has a good understanding of the project now. So we want to create a leaderboard. And what I find works best here is to be quite specific. If you just say create a leaderboard, it will do it, but it might not do it the way you want it to. So I kind of treat this like I'm going to hand it off to a coworker and give it all the information it needs. So I want to add a leaderboard where there are high scores by name. They should persist in local storage. The game should prompt the user to provide a name via a clean white modal with a semi-transparent background around the modal after 3 guesses. Then they can either
At the end of the second line, you just have CA instead of can, just so you know.
it'll figure it out. I often do terrible spelling with this, and it's pretty good at sorting it out. But yeah, generally I will go and fix that. Chef Smart sorting with the top 3 having gold, silver, and bronze. It should also be responsive because we want this to work on mobile. Then I do think hard and give me a clear plan with how you are going to execute it. And then with Claude Code, there's a planning mode, which I use for this, but you don't really need it. So I was very specific with what I want here. You don't always have to be this specific, but depending on the environment you're working in and how you need this, or how much leeway you have, you can either be more or less specific. So yeah, it's thinking, it knows what I need. It's looking through the code and it creates a to-do list for these tasks. So it's going to first design the data structure for the leaderboard and the game session tracking, create these modals. It's actually not going to do these yet, just yet. It's going to ask me, but it's going to create a plan, give it to me, and then I'll either approve it or not. So leaderboard display. Perfect. I think this looks great. And I will approve with manual. So I have to approve every coding change they make. So after they make one or two, and I'm happy with the direction it's going, I'll switch it on to auto. But in general, I like to keep an eye on the first one or two just to make sure it's moving the right direction.
Hey, there was a question in the chat. They say, do you find that telling it to think hard makes it plan out its response better than not telling it to do that?
So with Claude Code itself, it actually triggers extended thinking. So it uses more tokens to think about it. Um, it depends on the tool you use, but in general, it doesn't hurt, even if you're not using Claude Code. But with Claude Code specifically, it's like a keyword that you can use. Okay. And I'm just going to let it write all the changes going forward. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, someone just raised their hand. Go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, thank you. David Capson here. I had a question that's similar to what was just asked. Some of the words that I see being used are quite subjective, like think hard. That means different things to different people. What if you said think a little bit, but not too much? Think soft, think really, really hard. Like, how does it interpret these very soft and ill-defined words?
It's a good
And there
question.
were other examples earlier in your presentation, but the same concept where the words that you use are very subjective and very open to human interpretation, right or wrong. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So with Claude Code, it actually looks for the word think hard in the prompt and then enables it to do thinking. So in this specific case, that's what I was doing there. In general, it's just trained off human input. So it sometimes will just do more thinking, even if you're not using Claude Code based on that. But it is quite subjective, and these models are non-deterministic. So there's a chance that it'll take it the wrong direction. Generally, when I'm doing this kind of stuff at work, I have, instead of just a little prompt here, I have an actual document I have it read in. So I say read plan.md or plan.txt, which has a couple, like 1,000 lines of planning I want it to do instead. But this is just like a leaderboard for this app. So it is a little bit less strict. I'm not as fussed about how it works specifically.
There's a couple of questions in the chat too. One is, can you start off without any code already?
Yep. Yeah, you can definitely do that. That's why I built this app initially. I was like, I want a coin flip game. Give it to me. And it just it came up with this application here. Um,
Did you
I
use a document for that, or did you do it at the command prompt?
For this one, I just did it at the command prompt.
Gotcha.
Okay, so here everything's worked, but it is trying to run my Docker file, which is basically how I can visualize this here. So I don't want it to do that. Don't do this. Docker is already. So then the app should be done. We have a leaderboard. Oh, I built this out initially just to make sure it would be able to do something. So it probably has my game already set up. But if I refresh the page and try again, let's see how it goes. Uh-oh. Let's see. Cool. So it outlined, it had a name modal. It has a persistent leaderboard, as we saw. It has session storage, so it'll track your current session. And it has a responsive design. So we'll test out the responsive design. We'll get the modal to pop up. And great. Yeah, not a great game. So Bob's in fourth place right now. Let's see if I can get one more. Yeah, so it looks like there's a few issues with it, but it's a good start here and it displays it nicely. Um,
So if to troubleshoot that, would you, and not that you need to do that now, but would you go manually into the code or would you ask it to explore what's wrong with the percentages?
What I would do, so we can do that quickly here. When I get on the leaderboard and then win more games, my positioning, the leaderboard does not change. Can you throw it in plan mode just so it doesn't try and make any changes, just so I can see what's actually happening here. But as it's noodling on that, yeah, we can run through and see what it added. It added session tracking, all this stuff. So to fix the leaderboard, you have to track the cumulative performance and add continuous tracking. So let's try this quick, see if it works. This is more on the vibe coding side of things than what I would generally do at work, but this still works fine for most stuff. And because we're using Git, I can see these are all the files that have changed. So what I could do, git add here's dash m. Cool. So I have the initial changes set up. Oop, I interrupted it. So it'll try and make this fix. So we'll give it one shot here quickly and then move on because we're already halfway through. Goodness. And then after this, what we'll do is I'll ask it to update the documentation for the game. Because if we look at the code base, we have a game mechanics and a technical architecture document. So I got Claude Code to generate this with the initial implementation. For a game like this is crazy overkill, but this is what the kind of thing I would do in a production environment. And this helps other people working on the application, and also the Claude Code can read this and have a better understanding for the context behind the changes too. Because just looking at the code should generally be all you need, but it's useful to have any background context in the documentation.
There's a question in the chat, Ryan. Is there any way to compare credit cost with different prompts without actually incurring the costs?
The issue here is each update here. So this is a prompt. There's tons of prompts that go into this because it's a much more iterative approach. So not really. The nice thing currently about Claude Code is you can pay like $20 a month and get free access to this with a limit for how many times you can call it per every 4 hours, but you can do it without having to worry about the cost on a per prompt basis with that. But in general, if you're using the Sonnet model, it's not too expensive. Like my coworkers who use it fairly regularly throughout the day generally use like $20 a day if they're using it for like 3 or 4 hours of the day. Okay, we won't go through this again, but it should have fixed the issue going forward. But yeah, we have our nice leaderboard here that it planned out. So I'm just going to let it know that it worked. Okay, perfect. That worked. Now update the documentation in the readme.md and docs folder with this new functionality. And while that's working, I can compare and see what changes were made with that fix that it gave. So it checks to see if the user exists. If it does, it updates after every role. And if not, it'll push them onto the leaderboard. So I'm sure this would work. In production, I'll also have it write tests to verify that it worked, because it's very useful to have it be able to know for a fact if its functionality worked or not. So I can have Claude Code running for over 30 minutes without input if it has tests to go off of to confirm, one, that its functionality worked, and two, that it didn't break any previous functionality.
Have you ever had problems with when having it create the tests that it creates a self-serving test so that its code passes without actually passing?
Sometimes an approach I will generally do is have it write the tests before writing the functionality. So I make sure that the tests fail and then have it write the functionality. But that can still happen there. That's where reading the code and understanding how it's doing things is helpful. So if I were to keep going on with this application, I'd want to like review the code, make sure it makes sense. If it does anything which I don't like, I'll let it know, hey, switch this up for me. This doesn't make sense. And then it'll be like, oh, yes, you're right. This does not make sense. Let me make the change. So sometimes you just have to do that. Cool. Looks like it's just about done creating all these docs. But yeah, it's building out, it's adding all the leaderboard functionality here. Cool. And while it's doing that, I'll write the next prompt. So help me figure out what new feature to into this application. Next, give me just wait for a sec here. Actually, I think you guys get it. I'll just stop this prompt now and then start on the new one.
So you're asking it for 3 potions?
Let's see if it knows potions versus options. Yeah, so it can even understand my bad spelling. Cool. So the 3 options are a streak challenge mode, which is pretty cool. Customization and theming for different nice backgrounds, and advanced statistics dashboard. So I don't always do this, but it's cool to brainstorm with it, new things to add in that I wouldn't necessarily think about. I don't always go with its suggestions, but it is pretty cool what it can come up with. Is there a question?
Yeah, there's a question in the chat. Is there a reason you chose Claude Code rather than another tool?
Well, you're
Oh,
in luck.
yeah. We
Perfect.
did not plant that question.
I'll address the question and then talk about the different options. I use Claude Code because it's the best right now. I personally don't really care about the tool. With a lot of the approaches and stuff I was talking through, you can use them in any of these tools. I've used Gemini CLI, Cursor, and ChatGPT Codex, and basically all of this stuff works on all of them. For me, just the best tool is the most important. If you're more concerned about price, because this isn't like a production application, Gemini CLI is free. So it's about 80% as good as Claude Code, but doesn't cost money. So in that case, maybe Gemini CLI makes sense. But everything that you do in Claude Code translates pretty well into these tools. And I guess the differences between them are the Gemini CLI is basically a copy of the Claude Code tool, but for the Google Gemini models. So it's also terminal based. It's quite autonomous. It does a good job at that. and it has even more context than Claude Code. So in some cases, when you have a huge application and you need a million tokens of context, you might want to reach for Gemini CLI, even if it's not quite as good. And it's just about as extendable as Claude Code. Cursor is, I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but it's an IDE based off of VS Code, and it's pretty good. It focuses on efficiency per token. So with Claude Code, it often will brute force things by just looking at a lot of files and spending a lot of tokens thinking about things, where Cursor's business model is more about optimizing the tokens. So it's quite good, and per token, it's probably better, but Claude Code and Gemini CLI do a better job. And then the coolest one is ChatGPT Codex, which, unlike the other two or the other three tools, is a web app. So you hook your GitHub repository into ChatGPT Codex, and it will put the code in a virtual machine and actually do all the stuff I was doing in the terminal, but via a virtual machine, which is cool. And it is quite autonomous and has a ton of context, but because it's a web app, you can't really extend it. And I'll talk a bit more about headless mode after. But yeah, like I said at the start, the tool doesn't really matter. All of these principles are what matter the most right now. As models get better, you can be a bit lazier, but at this point, you still need to have pretty good principles to make the best use of these tools. Speaking of principles, we kind of went, I talked about these a little bit during the demo, but being super specific and explicit is really important right now. I was kind of explicit in what I wanted, but like some people said, my terminology was fairly loose. So to get the best results, you really do need to specify exactly what you're looking for and be really explicit in your prompts. Along with that, starting with small tasks is really good and iterating from there, especially as you're getting started. It can feel tempting to just tell Claude Code or any of these tools, just make you an application, but often it's going to fail at that. They're great, but they're not that good yet. So really focusing on small tasks, and as you get a feel for it, going bigger and bigger as you get a good grasp on the model. And as you're iterating, commit early and often with Git. It will save you a lot of time. If you have working code, do a follow-up prompt, which breaks everything. It's kind of a pain to go through 1,000 lines of code and look for the one thing it broke. So if you can just revert those changes, it can save you a ton of time. And the final three are provide rules and context. So at Clever, we have a file, which it's called a style guide. So it says, this is how you should write code. These are examples. And it's like 1,000 lines of just, this is how you do specific things. And it helps the tooling follow our coding conventions, because at our company, we have strict style guides on how the code should look, because we still care about readability for our team, and we should know how it all works. So providing a bunch of rules and context around how and why it's creating things is key. The explore, plan, code loop, that's what we did, where I let the model explore the code base, understand what it is, plan the change that we want to make, and then once I've approved it, code it out. That's probably the most important thing, because it will give you the best success in building any functionality with these tools. And finally, giving Claude a feedback loop to verify its work. At my job, we have a test suite where we make sure every piece of functionality works. So every time Claude follows the explore, plan, code loop, it runs our tests to verify that it didn't break anything and that everything works correctly. So yeah, that's these are really important to get good software. A couple quick things. I know we're kind of tight on time here. Claude Code and all these tools have access to MCP servers, which are just a way to have Claude interact with the outside world. So accessing GitHub, Jira, Google Docs, giving it access to your tools will help it work better. Just like how if you have a coworker and they can access Google Docs, it will. Headless mode is great. It will allow you to run these prompts without you being involved at all. So at Clever, my company, we have automated code review with Claude Code, where we have a 300-line prompt where we tell it to look for specific things in each code pull request. And it will flag a lot of issues early on before a human reviews it. We don't use it for the full review, but it's a good first pass and saves hours of time each week. I guess that's similar to this one, where we have these automated code reviews inside a continuous integration pipeline in GitHub. And the final thing, running multiple Claude codes in parallel with Git Worktree. I hadn't heard of Git Worktree before a month or two ago, but it allows you to have a branch of your code in a subdirectory. So in each subdirectory, you can have a different branch running Claude Code, building things in parallel. Because once you get familiar with Claude Code, you can have it running in the background for like 30 minutes without input. And that's where Git work trees are nice, because it can work on multiple different tasks at the same time. And the key takeaway is AI augments developers. You still need expert guidance. That's not going away anytime soon. It can really improve your productivity, but it's not going to replace you. And you need to own the code that you're having it right. It's on you're responsible for how it works and how it interacts with your systems. Clear prompts and context always create better output. An extra 5 minutes refining your prompt or document will save you a lot of time and back and forth with Claude. Then stay tool agnostic. Claude Code is great right now, but if Gemini CLI got better tomorrow, I would switch immediately. The workflows are more important than the actual tool. Then finally, experimenting and iterating is key. This is all new. People are finding new ways of doing things with these tools every day. So finding out what works well for you is important, and experimenting and trying new things. Thank you for listening. Any questions, comments, concerns?
Yeah, feel free to raise your hand or put something in the chat, and yeah, we've got at least 15 minutes for some discussion now.
There's a comment about security risks. There definitely are. I think one of the key things, like for that example before, when we're talking about the person using Replit, you don't give it access to anything production. Everything should run locally on your machine, and you only give it autonomous access to tools that you trust it won't abuse. So, for example, in my developer workflow, I let it do anything to my files because I use Git and it can't destroy anything too seriously. But for web access, I want to approve websites it tries to go to get information. And with database access, I'd only give it read access to databases that aren't critical to the company, for example. Never any production things. But different companies have different risk tolerances. Some companies are very much just do whatever, but I like to be a bit more, a little bit more restrictive on what you give it access to. Resource intensive. How resource intensive is Claude Code? It's all running in the cloud. So in our front, it doesn't really, like on my machine, it's not too bad at all. I imagine it uses a fair bit of compute on their servers, but I'm not particularly sure. How much time do you spend playing around with different tools, and when do you decide to switch what primary tool you're using? Yeah, so I try not to spend too much time playing around with new tools right now. There's just too much work to do. But there's a YouTube person who I follow pretty closely who is very much into exploring new tools that I put quite a bit of stock into. He's a bit hypey about things, but I kind of look at the just mainly the tools he's using and follow a lot of his patterns. His name is Indie Dev Dan. Is there any more to that? But honestly, using any of these tools is great. I try not to tool hop too much. Claude, if you use Gemini CLI or Claude Code, you're going to get basically the same result. They're all very good. For me, just the extra 5 or 10% of performance you get from a tool like Claude Code, I appreciate for my work, but realistically, I would be fine with any of them. And I've used all of them at work before, and they all work fairly well. His website, I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah, just found that now. Are there any other questions or comments or people who've had experience with Agentic Gen AI when in your coding practice at school or for fun or for profit? I know one of the things that I'm been doing some research on, and not in the coding realm, but de-skilling Gen AI tools and maybe people not developing the expertise they need to be a good partner with Gen AI tools, in that it can write text that is inaccurate, and if I'm not an expert in the area, I won't necessarily be able to see that without fact checking it completely. So just something for if we got any first or second year comp sci or software engineering students, you got to be very careful to fact check everything in terms of the code to make sure it's working properly. Just don't take it at face value, because it will not. Sometimes it will misrepresent itself until you confront it when you know that there is something wrong. So
Yeah, so it looks very convincing all the time, which is the tricky bit. That's why if you can, at least with most coding things, if it can prove itself right, generally it's okay. But yeah, when I'm asking it questions about specific packages or something, I run into the problem where it sounds very right, but when I actually try and implement it, it's wrong. So yeah, knowing just trust but verify for a lot of this stuff. My company, we're hiring some people right now, and in the interview process, we tell them they have a take-home project that takes an hour or two, and then we have a very small, just over Zoom test that we like, hey, you just create this very basic thing. Just in the next 30 minutes, we'll just walk through it together. You can use AI or anything, but most people don't use AI because they think it's bad in an interview, but then also just can't do it. So they have this beautiful take-home test they've sent us, but they don't know a lot of the fundamentals at all,
Right.
which is pretty. It's crazy. Like I've felt that too in some ways. Luckily I've been conscious of it for a while, so I try and not forget too much, but it is kind of scary.
Right. There's also, to that note about interviews, I just put it in the chat, but a student at Columbia who made a tool where the user basically opens this app. It's a like invisible overlay that they can see but can't be seen on screen share, and it basically draws from LeetCode and has all the code right there that they just copy into their editor, and that's the editor's all the interviewer sees, but it's dangerous stuff. Thanks for the presentation.
Yeah, no problem.
yeah, actually, I was just thinking about I'm teaching a completely online ed tech course in January, which is the first time I've done it online, but I was thinking about how to make sure that people are actually doing the work and not just using Gen AI. So one of the things I think I might do is just have them submit in Word documents and require them to have track changes on so that I can actually see a document or an essay or whatever it is being built over time as opposed to just a copy paste. The whole thing is, now I'm sure there's going to be ways around that, but yeah. Anyways, it's an interesting issue from the educational assessment perspective, but it seems like you found a way around that in your interviews to do a little bit of live coding just so you can get a sense for what their skills are like in that environment.
Yeah, it's hard though, because it's just tricky now that because at Clever we don't care if they use AI, but we just want to know that they can do the thing and know the concepts enough. But
Yeah.
yeah, in schooling that must be even trickier.
Mhm. Do you have a comment or a question, Michael?
No.
Oh,
no.
okay. Sorry, just checking. Yeah. Well, if there are no comments or questions or discussion, I think we'll wind up a couple minutes early here, but thank you all for coming out.